They say a man's true character is revealed on the day he thinks he's already won. I had believed that for 30 years. I had built an empire on that principle, carving my name into the bedrock of New York's underworld with blood and iron and an unshakable faith in my own instincts. I had survived ambushes, betrayals, federal investigations, and the slow poison of time itself. I had buried more enemies than I could count and outlived every rival who had ever raised a hand against me. And on the morning of my 50th birthday, as I stood in the master suite of my Hudson Valley estate adjusting the cufflinks my late mother had given me, I truly believed I had won. The house was a monument to that victory. 32 rooms of limestone and glass, perched on 200 acres of manicured land that had once belonged to a railroad baron. I had bought it for cash, renovated it with a taste that surprised even my harshest critics, and filled it with art that would make the Met weep with envy. It was my fortress, my sanctuary, the physical proof that a boy from the slums of Red Hook could rise to become the most feared and respected man in 5 states, and tonight, I would fill it with everyone who mattered. The guest list had been curated with the precision of a military operation. The old money families who had once sneered at my accent now clamored for invitations. The politicians whose campaigns I had financed smiled with practiced warmth. The board members of my legitimate holding companies, the men and women who managed the vast network of businesses that laundered my power into respectability, they would all be there. And at my side, radiant and untouchable, would be Victoria, as she was already dressed when I entered the sitting room adjacent to our bedroom. The gown was a deep emerald silk that hugged her slender frame like a second skin, and the diamond necklace around her throat was worth more than most people's retirement portfolios. She caught my reflection in the floor-length mirror and smiled, but it was the smile of a woman who had already calculated her exit strategy. I had known Victoria for 3 years, been engaged to her for 18 months, and in all that time, I had never quite shaken the feeling that she was performing for me. The passion was there, yes, but it was the passion of an actress who knew her lines perfectly, not the raw, unguarded emotion of a woman in love. "You look handsome," she said, turning to face me. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she crossed the room. "Though I wish you would let the tailor take in the waist a little. The last thing you need is to look like one of those bloated patriarchs from the old country." I forced a chuckle, though the comment stung more than it should have. I had always been lean, a fighter's build honed by years of violence and discipline. The suggestion that I was letting myself go was deliberate. A small needle slipped into the fabric of her affection. I kissed her forehead, a gesture she tolerated more than welcomed. "The guests are arriving," I said. "I need to be downstairs." "Of course you do," she replied, already turning back to the mirror to adjust her earrings. Always the host. Always the center of attention. I descended the grand staircase to the main ballroom, the sounds of a live string quartet drifting up from below. The room was a masterpiece of understated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables laden with silver and porcelain, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River glittering in the twilight. My staff moved with practiced efficiency, weaving through the growing crowd of guests with trays of champagne and canapés. I recognized faces from every corner of my life. Senator Morrison, a man I had turned from an idealistic prosecutor into a pliable tool. Antonio Ricci, my consigliera, a silver-haired fox who had served my father before me. Elias Vance, the CEO of my flagship shipping company, a man whose loyalty had been purchased with a seat on the board and a blind eye to his gambling debts. And scattered among them, the lieutenants, the captains, the soldiers who had spilled blood in my name and expected to drink from my cup in return. I smiled, shook hands, accepted the toasts and the flattery. The champagne was exquisite, the music flawless, and the atmosphere electric with a kind of self-congratulatory warmth that only the wealthy can manufacture. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, that old familiar prickle at the back of my neck that had saved my life more times than I could count. It was the way Christopher, my most trusted lieutenant, kept glancing at the stage. The way his hand drifted to his pocket every time he laughed. The way Victoria, from her perch on the upper landing, watched the crowd like a hawk surveying a field of prey. I had dismissed these instincts before, chalked them up to paranoia and the accumulated weight of a lifetime of vigilance. But tonight, on the night of my greatest triumph, they screamed louder than ever. I was still scanning the room, cataloging exits and assessing threats, when I felt the tug on my pant leg. I looked down, expecting a wayward child of one of my guests, a bored kid who had wandered away from his parents and found himself drawn to the towering figure in the center of the room. What I saw instead was a small boy, no more than 3 years old, with dark, serious eyes and a face that held none of the innocence you would expect from a child his age. He stared up at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His small hand, clutching the silk of my trousers, was trembling. His lips were parted, his breath shallow, as if he had been running or hiding or both. And when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, pitched so low that only I could hear it over the din of conversation and music. "Red lights," he said. "A lot of red lights." I blinked, uncomprehending. "What did you say, little one?" "In the walls," he continued, his gaze darting toward the stage where the quartet played on, oblivious. "Under the music. They're waiting. The red lights are waiting for you." Time seemed to slow. The laughter around me faded to a dull hum. The chandeliers blurred into molten gold. I looked at the stage, at the elegant wooden paneling that concealed the structural skeleton of the house. I looked at the walls, at the tasteful sconces, and the intricate molding that I had personally approved during the renovation, and in my mind, I saw what the boy was trying to tell me. Not lights. Not decorative fixtures, detonators that I had seen them before, in a dusty warehouse in Fallujah, in the basement of a rival's casino, in the twisted wreckage of a car bomb that had nearly taken my life a decade ago. The red lights of military-grade explosives, wired to consume everything they touched. And here, in my home, on the night of my greatest celebration, they were everywhere. The boy released my pant leg and stepped back, his face pale. Behind him, a young woman in a maid's uniform rushed forward, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed the boy by the arm and yanked him away, her mouth already forming apologies that I could not hear. Her name was Helena. She had been on my staff for 5 years. I had never really noticed her before. Now, I could not look away from her son. The room had gone quiet. Guests were staring at me, their conversations faltering. Victoria was making her way down the stairs, her heels clicking with urgent precision. Christopher was approaching from the side, his hand still in his pocket. The moment stretched, thin and fragile as glass. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was standing in the center of a trap, but I also knew something else. The boy had tried to save me. A child, terrified, vulnerable, with no reason to trust the man who employed his mother, had reached out to warn the monster he thought I was. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being a target and started becoming something far more dangerous, that I was no longer the prey, that I was the hunter. And nothing would stop me from burning the truth out of every traitor in this room. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Every pair of eyes in that glittering hall was fixed on me, waiting for an explanation, waiting for the dawn to laugh it off, to wave the child away, to restore the careful illusion of normalcy that made events like this bearable. I could feel their expectations pressing against me like a physical weight, the collective breath of 100 powerful men and women holding in unison. But I wasn't laughing. I couldn't even summon the muscle memory of a smile. My mind was racing through calculations that would have made a quantum physicist dizzy. The detonators the boy had described, they would be wired to the building's main power grid, triggered by a signal that could come from anywhere. A phone call, a remote detonator, a simple timer concealed in the electronics of the stage. The orchestra was still playing, oblivious to the catastrophe waiting to ignite beneath their feet. The guests were still standing, frozen in attitudes of elegant curiosity. And Christopher was still approaching, his hand sliding out of his pocket, empty now, his face a mask of concern that was just a fraction of a second too slow. "Alessandro." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Is everything all right?" The boy startled you. "I'll have security remove the staff." The suggestion hung in the air like a trap of its own. Remove the staff. silencing the only witness who had seen the truth. I had built my empire on the backs of men like Christopher, men who understood that loyalty was a transaction, and that every transaction had its price. But the price he was asking me to pay now was my own life, and the lives of everyone in this room. I turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time in years. He was handsome in the way that all my lieutenants were handsome, sharp suits and sharper smiles, the kind of man you could trust with a secret or a shiv. We had bled together in alleyways and boardrooms. I had watched him kill a man who threatened his sister, and then helped him bury the body in the Jersey marshes. I had given him everything: status, wealth, the kind of power that could make men weep with gratitude, and he had repaid me with red lights in the walls. "I'm fine, Christopher," I said, my voice calm enough to freeze the champagne in the glasses. The boy was just frightened. He saw something outside, probably a reflection. Children have wild imaginations. Christopher's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. He bought it. They all bought it. The tension in the room eased as laughter and conversation resumed, the guests too eager for the party to continue to question the dawn's sudden stillness. But Victoria was not so easily fooled. She had reached my side now, her fingers curling around my arm with a grip that was more command than comfort. Her voice was honey and vinegar, sweet enough to soothe, sharp enough to wound. "Darling, you are rattled by a maid's child. It's embarrassing. The entire room is watching. Pull yourself together." I looked at her, at the diamond necklace that had cost $500,000, at the perfect gown that she had chosen with the help of a stylist who also worked for the wives of my rivals, at the steady, calculating gaze that had never once wavered with genuine love for me. "You knew," I said, the words soft, almost conversational. Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about? You knew what was in the walls, Victoria. You and Christopher and whoever else you've been plotting with. You knew this was the night you would collect on whatever promises they made you." Her grip on my arm tightened until her nails bit through the silk of my jacket. "You're losing your mind, Alessandro. You're paranoid. You're old and paranoid, and you're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone who matters." I could feel the anger building in my chest, a slow, steady burn that had nothing to do with the champagne or the warmth of the room. But I didn't let it show. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous men were the ones who felt the most and showed the least. My father had taught me that lesson in the back of a butcher shop in Red Hook, his blood still warm on the floor, his final words a whisper about the value of patience. "Stay here," I said to Victoria, pulling my arm free. "Don't move. Don't speak. Just watch." She tried to protest, but I was already walking away, cutting through the crowd with the easy grace of a man who had parted crowds like this 1,000 times before. I made my way toward the stage, my bodyguards falling into formation behind me without a word. Sal, my head of security, was already reading the tension in my posture, his hand hovering near the holster under his jacket. "Sal," I murmured, barely moving my lips. "The stage. The walls. I need sweep teams on every floor. I need jammers on every frequency. And I need you to find the maid and her son. Bring them to the study. No one touches them." Sal didn't ask questions. He never did. That was why I trusted him with my life. He peeled off from my group, his earpiece glowing as he issued rapid-fire orders to the hidden security network that infested every corner of the estate. I reached the stage just as the quartet finished their piece. The applause was polite, restrained. I climbed the steps and took the microphone from the startled conductor, my presence commanding instant silence. "My friends," I said, my voice amplified to fill the cavernous room. "My family. Tonight, we celebrate 50 years of survival, 50 years of building something that will outlast us all. But first, I need to share something with you." I saw Christopher's face in the crowd, his smug confidence starting to waver. I saw Victoria, her eyes wide with what might have been fear or rage or both. I saw the board members, the politicians, the old money families who had come to witness my triumph. And I saw the walls. The beautiful, elegant walls that concealed the death waiting to embrace us all. "One of you," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper that the microphone still caught, has betrayed me. One of you has filled this house with explosives, intending to turn this celebration into a massacre. And that one of you—" I paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle over the room like a shroud, "is standing among us right now." The silence that followed was deeper than anything I had ever heard. It was the silence of 100 souls realizing they might be standing on the edge of their own graves, but it was also the silence of a hunter who had just flushed his prey from the brush. Christopher broke first. His hand went to his jacket, and in that moment, in the sharp white glare of the chandeliers, I saw the truth reflected in his panicked eyes. He had planned for me to die tonight. He had planned for everyone in this room to die. And he had planned to walk out of the ashes as the new power in New York. He had forgotten one thing. I was not a man who died in traps I didn't set myself. The moment Christopher's hand touched his jacket, the room erupted into chaos. Screams tore through the ballroom like shrapnel, high and sharp and utterly useless. Crystal glasses shattered against marble floors as guests scrambled for the exits, their carefully cultivated elegance dissolving into primal panic. Women in gowns worth more than cars trampled each other in their rush for the doors. Men who had ordered executions without flinching now clawed at the walls like trapped animals. But I was already moving, then my hand shot out, grabbing Christopher's wrist before his fingers could close around the grip of his pistol. I twisted, hard, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone giving way beneath my grip. He howled, a sound of pure animal pain, and the weapon clattered to the stage floor. I kicked it aside and drove my knee into his solar plexus, folding him like a cheap suit. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. "Sal," I said, my voice cutting through the pandemonium like a blade. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves. No one." Sal was already barking orders into his earpiece, his men fanning out across the ballroom with the precision of a military unit. The exits slammed shut, heavy oak doors reinforced with steel that I had installed specifically for occasions like this. The guests who had reached them found themselves staring down the barrels of tactical rifles, their screams dying in their throats. I dragged Christopher to his feet by his collar, ignoring his gasps and the blood that dripped from his broken wrist. His face was pale, slick with sweat, the arrogance that had defined him for years stripped away to reveal the trembling coward beneath. "You really thought this would work?" I asked, my voice low enough that only he could hear. "You thought I would die on the night of my greatest triumph, surrounded by the people I trust most? I had help," he spat, his eyes darting toward Victoria. "You don't know who else is involved. You don't know how deep this goes." I smiled, a cold expression that made him flinch. "Then you will tell me. You will tell me everything, Christopher. You will tell me who sent you, who funded this operation, and who else in this room was foolish enough to think they could take what I built. And when you are done telling me, I will decide how much of your body I leave intact." His face crumpled. The bravado that had carried him through years of service, through betrayals and bloodshed and the brutal calculus of organized crime, evaporated like mist in the morning sun.
He was just a man now.
A broken, terrified man who had miscalculated the cost of ambition. I handed him off to Sal's men, watching as they dragged him toward the basement. The interrogation rooms were already prepared, soundproof and spotless, tools waiting for hands that knew exactly how to use them. Christopher would talk. They always talked. But I wasn't done with the ballroom yet. The guests had been herded into the center of the room, a terrified flock surrounded by the wolves of my security detail. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale, their expensive perfumes mingling with a sharp scent of fear. Among them, I spotted the board members, the politicians, the old money patriarchs who had come to witness my triumph and were now witnessing something far more terrifying. I walked among them, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The string quartet had long since abandoned their instruments, leaving the stage empty except for the discarded weapon and Christopher's blood. "The explosives," I said, addressing the room at large. "They are in the walls, wired to detonate. The child saved us all. A child whose mother cleans your floors and serves your drinks. A child you would have thrown out on the street without a second thought." My gaze fell on Victoria, still standing where I had left her, her face a mask of carefully controlled fury. She had not tried to flee, had not tried to explain, had not shown even a flicker of the guilt that should have been eating her alive. She was waiting, calculating, searching for an angle that could salvage her position. "Victoria," I said, my voice soft, almost kind. "Come here." She hesitated, just for a moment. Then she lifted her chin and walked toward me, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the same measured rhythm she had used when she first walked into my life. She was beautiful, composed, every inch the queen she had always believed herself to be. "Alessandro," she said, stopping a few feet away. "This is a misunderstanding. Christopher acted alone. I had no knowledge of his plans. You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything," I replied. "I have to know the truth. And the truth, Victoria, is that you were seen. You were seen meeting with Christopher and his partners in a hotel room 3 weeks ago. You were seen accepting payment for your role in this conspiracy. You were seen." Her composure cracked. Just a hairline fracture, barely visible to anyone who didn't know her as intimately as I did. But I saw it. I saw the fear that had been hiding beneath the mask all along. "You can't prove that," she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to steady it. "You have no evidence." "I don't need evidence," I said, stepping closer. "I am the law in this city, Victoria. I am the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And I have decided that you are guilty." She opened her mouth to respond, to plead, to lie, but I was already turning away from her. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. The betrayal of a trusted lieutenant was a wound I could heal. The betrayal of a woman I had planned to marry was a wound that would never fully close, but I would not let it weaken me. I would not let it distract me from the larger game at play. I scanned a room, my eyes searching for the faces that didn't belong, the guests who had been planted among the legitimate invitees to witness the spectacle of my destruction. There were 3 of them, I realized. 3 men in impeccable suits who stood just a little too still, their eyes tracking my movements with professional precision. They were not guests. They were observers. Spies sent by whoever had orchestrated this attack to confirm my death and report back on the aftermath. And now they would report back on something far more valuable. "Sal," I called out. "The 3 men in the gray suits. Secure them. Don't hurt them. Just hold them in the study until I arrive." The spies didn't resist. They knew better. They knew that resistance would mean death, and death was not what they had been sent to deliver. They walked with Sal's men, calm and composed, their expressions betraying nothing, but I saw something in their eyes as they passed me. A flicker of respect, a recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a man who had turned a trap into a victory and emerged stronger than ever. The ballroom was quiet now, the guests still clustered in the center of the room, their fear slowly giving way to confusion. The party was over. The celebration had become something else entirely, and I was just getting started. I had a maid to thank, a child to protect, and a city full of traitors to destroy. The hunt had only just begun. The study was the only room in the estate that remained unchanged from the day I had bought it. Dark paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that held first editions and forged documents in equal measure, a fireplace that had never once been lit because I had never once felt the need for warmth in this house. It was the room where I conducted the business that couldn't be discussed in broad daylight, where I met with men who had blood on their hands and secrets in their hearts. It was the room where I had signed the death warrants of a dozen rivals, where I had broken the spirits of informants, where I had forged alliances that had reshaped the criminal landscape of the eastern seaboard. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. The 3 spies were seated in the leather chairs across from my desk, their hands cuffed behind their backs, their expressions carefully neutral. They were professionals, I could see that. Trained to endure interrogation, trained to give nothing away, trained to die before they betrayed their handlers. But they had never met me before. They had never sat across from a man who had spent 30 years learning the exact pressure points of the human soul. Helena was there too, standing in the corner with her son clutched against her chest. She was trembling, her face pale, her eyes darting between me and the bound men with a terror that made my chest tighten with an emotion I didn't have time to name. The boy, her son, was calm now, watching the proceedings with the same unnerving stillness he had displayed in the ballroom. I walked to my desk, settled into the leather chair behind it, and let the silence stretch. The spies watched me, waiting. Helena watched me, waiting. The boy watched me, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the desk lamp. "The child saved my life tonight," I said, breaking the silence. He saw something that none of my highly trained security personnel noticed. He saw red lights in the walls, and he had the courage to tell me about them. That is the kind of loyalty I value. That is the kind of courage I protect. I looked at the spies, letting my gaze linger on each of them in turn. "You're going to tell me who sent you. You're going to tell me who funded this operation. You're going to tell me who else in the city is involved in the conspiracy against me. And when you are done telling me, I am going to show you what happens to men who try to destroy what I have built." The first spy, a thin man with graying temples and the scarred knuckles of a fighter, smiled at me. "You don't scare me, Alderman. I've been in rooms like this before. I've sat across from men like you, and I've never broken." I nodded, acknowledging his bravery. "You're right. You've been in rooms like this before. But you've never sat across from a man who just survived an assassination attempt on his 50th birthday. You've never sat across from a man who just discovered that his fiancée and his most trusted lieutenant were in on the plot. You've never sat across from a man who has nothing left to lose." I reached into my desk drawer, my fingers closing around the cold metal of a device I had kept for just this purpose. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk between us. It was a small black box, unremarkable, the kind of thing you might find in any electronics store. But the spies recognized it instantly. I saw the color drain from their faces, saw the composure cracked. "A frequency jammer," I said, pressing the button. "Every microphone, every transmitter, every listening device within a 2-mile radius is now dead. No one can hear what happens in this room. No one can record it. No one can transmit it. For the next hour, we are completely alone in the world." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands on the desk. "So, let's start again. Who sent you?" The scarred spy's smile had vanished. He was looking at the jammer, his mind racing through the implications, calculating the odds of escape, the odds of survival. "The odds were not good. We were contracted by a third party," he said finally. "We don't know the ultimate source. We were told to observe, to report back, to confirm the destruction of the estate and the death of its occupants." "Who paid you?" "A shell company, based in the Caymans. We never met the principal. All communication was through encrypted channels." I nodded, unsurprised. This was how the game was played. Layers upon layers of separation, deniability built into every transaction, every conversation, every betrayal. The men who wanted me dead were not stupid. They were careful. They were patient, but they were also, I suspected, closer than I realized. "Sal," I said, raising my voice. "Take them to the basement. See if Christopher is ready to talk yet. If he's not, encourage him." The spies were let out, their faces betraying nothing but a grim acceptance of their fate. They had failed their mission, and they knew the price of failure. But they also knew that I was not their true enemy. They were pawns, just as Christopher was a pawn, just as Victoria was a pawn. The game was bigger than any of them. When the door closed behind them, I turned to Helena. She was shaking, her arms wrapped so tightly around her son that I could see the strain in her knuckles. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of desperate control. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please." She hesitated, then moved slowly, her son still clinging to her, settling into the leather chair that had once held the weight of a dozen dying men. Her gaze was fixed on her lap, her shoulders hunched, her body language screaming a lifetime of fear and submission. "Your name is Helena," I said. "You've worked for me for 5 years. You clean my rooms, serve my guests, go about your work without complaint. And you raised a son who has more courage than most men I know." "He didn't mean to intrude," she said, her voice trembling. "He doesn't understand the rules. He doesn't understand what this world is. I tried to keep him away. I tried to protect him." I heard the anguish in her voice, The desperation of a mother who had brought her child into a world of monsters and was terrified that she had failed him. My chest tightened again, that unfamiliar emotion pressing against my ribs. He didn't intrude, I said. He saved me. He saved everyone in that ballroom. And for that, I am in your debt. Helena looked up, her eyes wide with confusion. You owe nothing to me or my son. We are servants. We are nobody. I leaned forward, my voice softening in a way that I had not allowed it to soften in years. You are not nobody. You are the mother of a boy who saw what no one else saw and had the courage to speak. That makes you more valuable to me than anyone in that ballroom tonight. More valuable than the politicians, more valuable than the board members, more valuable than any of the traitors who tried to destroy me. Her son looked up at me then, his dark eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that belied his age.
He was a strange child, I realized.
A child who saw things that others didn't, who understood the world in ways that were beyond his years. He was like me in some ways. A survivor. A watcher. A child who had learned too early that the world was a dangerous place. What is your name, little one? I asked him. He held my gaze, unblinking. Micah, he said. My name is Micah. I reached across the desk, offering my hand. He looked at it for a moment, then reached out and placed a small palm against mine. His skin was soft, warm, impossibly fragile. And in that touch, I felt something I had not felt in decades. A connection. A purpose. A reason to keep fighting. Micah, I said, repeating his name. I am Alessandro. And I am going to make sure that nothing ever hurts you or your mother again. I am going to make sure that the world you grow up in is a world where children don't have to see red lights in the walls. I swear it. He smiled then, a small, hesitant smile that lit up his serious face. And in that smile, I saw the future I had never known I wanted, a future worth killing for. A future worth dying for. The basement of the Hudson Valley estate had been built to withstand a nuclear blast. I had designed it myself, back when I still believed that the greatest threats came from outside my walls. Reinforced concrete, steel doors, independent ventilation, and power systems. It was a bunker, a fortress, a place where a man could hide from the end of the world and emerge unscathed to build it anew. Tonight, it was entombed. I descended the concrete steps, my footsteps echoing in the fluorescent glare of the underground corridor. The air was cool, sterile, carrying the faint metallic tang of disinfectant and blood. Sal was waiting for me at the bottom, his expression grim, his hands clasped behind his back. He's ready, Sal said. He lasted longer than I expected. But he's ready. I nodded and walked past him into the room where Christopher was waiting. The interrogation room was sparse. Concrete walls. A steel table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs, one of which was occupied by the man who had once been my most trusted lieutenant. He was a wreck, his face a mask of bruises and swelling, his right hand bound in a makeshift splint, his clothes soaked with sweat and the evidence of his own weakness. He looked up at me with eyes that held no defiance, no hope, no trace of the arrogant soldier who had plotted my death.
He was just a man now.
A man who had made a terrible mistake and was about to pay for it with everything he had. Christopher, I said, settling into the chair across from him. I have to admit, I'm disappointed. I expected more from you. I expected loyalty, dedication, the kind of spine that makes a man worth keeping around. Instead, I got this. I had no choice, he said, his voice a broken rasp. They had my sister. They took her. They said if I didn't cooperate, they would kill her. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself. Your sister, the one who lives in Chicago, the one you never visit. She's not in Chicago anymore. They moved her. I don't know where. They sent me photos, videos. I had to do it. I had to. He was lying, of course. Or at least, he was lying about the extent of his coercion. Men like Christopher didn't betray their bosses for family. They betrayed them for money. For power. For the chance to become the boss themselves. But the lie was useful, if only because it gave me a thread to pull. Who they? I asked. Who is your sister? He hesitated, his eyes darting toward Sal, toward the camera in the corner, toward every exit he knew he couldn't reach. A group, he said finally. A consortium. They've been building an operation for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. They have resources, connections, people embedded in every organization in this city. They wanted you out and they wanted me in. A consortium. I repeated, the word tasting like ashes. Who leads it, I don't know. I never met them. All communication was through intermediaries. Encrypted messages. Dead drops. They were careful. They are always careful. Christopher was telling the truth, or at least he was telling the truth as he knew it. He was a middleman, a tool, a pawn in a game that was far larger than he had ever realized. The consortium he described was patient, ruthless, and intelligent. They had cultivated him for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And they had almost succeeded. Tell me everything you know, I said, leaning forward. Every contact, every location, every message. Leave nothing out. He spent the next hour talking. His sister was mentioned again, but it was clear that she was just a convenient excuse. The real lure had been the money, the promise of power, the chance to step out of my shadow and into the light of his own empire. He gave me names, though they were mostly dead ends. He gave me locations, though they were mostly empty warehouses and long-shuttered offices. He gave me details, though most of them were useless. But buried in the flood of information, I found what I was looking for. A name. A single name that Christopher had heard whispered in the encrypted messages, a name that had been treated with the kind of reverence reserved for gods and kings. Gideon. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard it before, never encountered it in my decades of navigating the criminal underworld. But the way Christopher said it, the way his voice faltered and his eyes dropped, told me everything I needed to know. What is Gideon? I asked. I don't know. I've never met him. But everyone talks about him. He's the architect, the mastermind, the man who pulls the strings behind the scenes. He's the one who orchestrated this whole operation. I sat back, processing the information. I had enemies. I had always had enemies. But I had never encountered a man named Gideon, a shadowy figure with the reach and resources to orchestrate an assassination attempt on my life. Where do I find him? I asked. I don't know. I swear. I don't know. Christopher was desperate now, his voice cracking with fear. He was telling the truth, or at least he believed he was telling the truth. Gideon was a ghost, a phantom, a name that existed only in the whispers of his underlings, but ghosts could be hunted. Phantoms could be exorcised. I had been doing it my entire life. I stood, pushing back from the table. Christopher looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Please, he said. Please don't kill me. I can help you. I can find more information. I can work for you. Truly work for you. You already worked for me, I said, my voice flat cold. And you betrayed me. There is no second chance, Christopher. Not for you. Not for anyone. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him to Sal's mercies. I had what I needed. I knew that there was a conspiracy against me, that it was led by a man named Gideon, that it had been built with a patience and precision that rivaled my own, and I knew that I would find him. I would find him, and I would destroy him, but first, I had other matters to attend to. A maid to protect, a boy to honor, a city to secure, and a fiancé who had betrayed me and was still waiting in the study, wondering what her fate would be. I would deal with Victoria next, and then I would find Gideon. She was still sitting in the chair when I walked back into the study, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, her chin lifted with the stubborn dignity of a woman who had convinced herself she was untouchable. The diamonds at her throat caught the lamplight, throwing tiny rainbows across the dark paneling. She looked like a painting, a masterpiece of elegance and arrogance. She looked like everything I had once wanted and now despised. Helena and Micah were gone. Sal had escorted them to a secure wing of the estate, a suite of rooms that had been prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. They would be safe there, protected by men who had no loyalties except to me and my money. The boy would sleep in a bed bigger than any he had ever known, and his mother would lie awake, wondering if her life had just been saved or irrevocably changed. But Victoria did not have the luxury of safety. She had the luxury of my attention, and my attention was a sword that could cut both ways. "Victoria," I said, settling into the chair behind my desk. "I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you admit what you did." "I have nothing to admit," she said, her voice steady, though I could see the tremor in her hands. "I did not know what Christopher's planning. I did not know about the explosives. I am innocent." "The hotel room," I said, pulling a photograph from my drawer and sliding it across the desk. "3 weeks ago. You met with Christopher and 2 other men. You sat in a room with them for 2 hours. You left with a briefcase full of cash." She looked at the photograph, and for the first time, her composure cracked. The mask of innocence slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "That's not what it looks like," she said. "It looks like you were paid for your role in my assassination. It looks like you sold me for a briefcase of money. It looks like you planned to stand beside me and watch me die, then walk out of this house as the grieving widow, inheriting everything I built." The accusation hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. Victoria stared at the photograph, her fingers curling into fists in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was different, sharp and bitter, the voice of a woman who had stopped pretending. "You were never going to marry me, Alessandro. You were never going to give me what I wanted. You kept me at arm's length, treated me like a decoration, never trusted me with anything real. I was just a prop in your empire, and I knew it. I knew it from the beginning." "Then why did you stay?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why did you endure my distance if you hated it so much?" "Because I wanted what you had," she said, her eyes blazing. "I wanted the power, the money,
The respect.
and I knew that the only way to get it was to take it from you." I nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of her words. She was not the first person to want my empire, and she would not be the last. But she was the first person I had loved, or at least the first person I had allowed myself to believe I loved. That was my mistake. That was the weakness I had allowed myself. "You could have left," I said. "You could have walked away with the money you had already earned, found a new life, started over. You chose to stay and plot my death. That was your choice, Victoria. That was your sin." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You think you're righteous, you think you're moral, you're the head of a criminal empire, Alessandro. You've killed more people than I can count. You've ruined lives, destroyed families, profited from misery. And now you stand in judgment over me, you're a hypocrite." I did not flinch. I had heard these accusations before, from prosecutors and rivals and men who had died with my name on their lips. They were not wrong. I had done terrible things, built my empire on blood and fear, and the suffering of others. But that did not change the fact that Victoria had tried to destroy me, that she had been willing to kill me and everyone else in that ballroom to get what she wanted. "I am not righteous," I said. "I am not moral. I am a survivor, Victoria. And survival means cutting out the parts of my life that threaten me. You are a threat. You have been a threat from the beginning, and I was too blind to see it." She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised a hand, silencing her. "You are not going to die," I said. "That would be too easy, too merciful. You are going to live. You are going to watch everything you wanted slip through your fingers. The money, the power, the respect, all of it. I am going to strip you of every asset you have, every connection you cultivated, every hope you ever had. And then I am going to let you walk away, penniless and powerless, to live the rest of your life in the shadow of what you lost." Her face went white. The bravado drained out of her, leaving behind a hollow shell of fear and anger. She had expected death, I realized. She had steeled herself for it. She had not expected to live, to endure, to face the humiliation of losing everything she had worked for. "You can't do that," she whispered. "I'll expose you. I'll go to the authorities, tell them everything I know." "You have no evidence," I said. "And even if you did, no one in this city would believe you. I own the authorities, Victoria. I own the judges, the prosecutors, the politicians. You are nothing to them. You are nothing to anyone." She sat in silence, her hands shaking, her eyes fixed on the photograph that had sealed her fate. I watched her, feeling nothing but a cold, distant satisfaction. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had never truly existed, Sal, I called out. Take her to the gate. Strip her of her jewelry, her purse, everything except the clothes on her back. Then let her walk. Victoria stood, her movements jerky, her face pale. She walked toward the door, then paused, turning to look at me one last time. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope it's worth everything you've lost. She was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I sat in the silence of the study, staring at the empty chair where she had been, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. I had lost a fiancé, a trusted lieutenant, and a celebration that had been meant to mark the pinnacle of my life. But I had gained something too. A truth about the world I lived in, a reminder that trust was a luxury I could not afford. And I had gained a mission, a purpose. The hunt for Gideon, the mastermind who had orchestrated this attack, the man who had tried to take everything from me and had failed, that I would find him. I would destroy him. And then, when the ashes settled, I would rebuild my empire on the foundation of a truth that I had finally understood. The only loyalty that mattered was the loyalty you earned, and the only love that lasted was the love you protected. I did not sleep that night. The estate was a fortress now, humming with the quiet energy of a facility on high alert. Every door was locked, every window sealed, every corridor patrolled by armed men who had proven their loyalty through years of service and blood. The guests had been released hours ago, their terrified whispers fading into the night as they fled back to their mansions and penthouses, carrying with them the story of a party that had almost become a massacre. But I remained in the study, surrounded by the debris of my shattered celebration, my mind churning with the information that Christopher had given me before his tongue had run dry. Gideon. The name was a splinter in my thoughts, an irritant that refused to be ignored. I had searched my memory, scoured the files of every rival, every enemy, every potential threat I had ever encountered. Nothing. The name had never crossed my lips, never appeared in a report, never been whispered in the vast network of informants that I had cultivated over the decades. Gideon was a ghost, and ghosts were the most dangerous enemies of all. That I reached for the encrypted phone on my desk, the one that connected me to the few people I still trusted with the absolute truth of my operations. Antonio Ricci, my consigliere, answered on the first ring, his voice gravelly with sleep, but sharp with immediate readiness. Alessandro. I heard about the attack. Are you safe? I'm alive, I said. That's more than they intended. I need you to investigate a name for me.
Gideon.
It means nothing to me, but Christopher mentioned it during his debriefing. He claimed this Gideon was the mastermind behind the operation. There was a long pause on Antonio's end. I could hear the rustle of sheets, the creak of a bed frame as he sat up. Antonio had been with me since the beginning, a silver-haired fox who had survived 4 wars and more assassination attempts than he had fingers to count. If anyone could find information on Gideon, it was him. Gideon, he repeated, the name tasting unfamiliar on his tongue. I've never heard of him, but that doesn't mean he doesn't exist. There are players in this city who operate in the shadows, moving pieces without ever revealing their faces. If this Gideon is one of them, he is careful, patient, the kind of threat that takes years to build. Then we need to find him before he builds his next move, I said. Start with Christopher's contacts, the ones he gave us during the interrogation. Check them all, no matter how insignificant they seem. Gideon is out there, Antonio, and he will try again. I'll put my best people on it, Antonio replied. But Alessandro, be careful. If this Gideon orchestrated an attack of this scale, he has resources, connections. He is not a man who acts alone. He is a man with an army behind him. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The weight of the night was pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I had survived the attack, but survival was not enough. Survival was a temporary reprieve. Victory was the only thing that mattered. I needed to find Gideon. And to find Gideon, I needed to understand what he wanted to, but I had other responsibilities too. Responsibilities that had appeared in the form of a terrified maid and her strange, perceptive son. That I rose from my desk and walked through the silent corridors of the estate, past the guards who snapped to attention as I passed, toward the secure wing where Helena and Micah had been placed. The door was guarded by two of my most trusted men, and they stepped aside without a word as I approached. I knocked softly, not wanting to startle them. The door opened a crack, and Helena's face appeared, pale and drawn in the dim light of the hallway. "Dawn," she said, her voice trembling. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is under control," I said. "I wanted to check on you." "On Micah." She opened the door wider, stepping back to let me enter. The suite was luxurious, a guest room that had been prepared for visiting dignitaries and high-ranking associates. A sitting area with plush sofas, a bedroom visible through an open door, a fireplace that crackled with a warmth that seemed foreign to the cold stone of the rest of the estate. Micah was sitting on one of the sofas, his legs dangling over the edge, a book open in his lap. He looked up as I entered, his dark eyes meeting mine with that same unnerving steadiness. "Hello, Alessandro," he said, as if I were an old friend. I smiled, a genuine smile that felt strange on my face. "Hello, Micah. Are you doing all right?" "I'm okay," he said. "Mama was scared, but I told her it was okay. I told her you would protect us." I felt something shift in my chest, a warmth that I had not allowed myself to feel in years. The boy's faith in me was absolute, unwavering. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, in the moments after the trap was sprung, and he had still chosen to trust me. "I will protect you," I said, my voice rough with an emotion I did not want to name. "You and your mother. No one will ever hurt you while I am alive." Helena hovered near the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes darting between me and her son. She was still afraid, I realized, still uncertain of her place in this strange new world. "Please," I said, gesturing to the sofa across from Micah. "Sit down. We need to talk." She hesitated, then moved to sit beside her son, her hand reaching out to rest on his shoulder. The gesture was protective, maternal, a shield against the unknown. "Your son has a gift," I said. "A gift that saved my life tonight. But that gift also makes him a target. There are people out there who would want to use him, to exploit his abilities for their own purposes. I cannot allow that to happen." Helena's face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you and Micah cannot stay here. Not in the long term. This estate is compromised, and I cannot guarantee your safety while I am hunting the man who tried to kill me. I need to send you somewhere safe. Somewhere no one will think to look." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "We have nowhere else to go. We have nothing. He is all I have, and I cannot protect him alone." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card, black, with a single embossed number. I handed it to her. "Take this," I said. "There is a woman named Elena who runs a safe house in the Adirondacks. She is a former intelligence operative, one of the best. She will keep you hidden, keep you safe, until I have dealt with the threat. When it is over, I will come for you. I will bring you back to a world where you never have to be afraid again." Helena stared at the card, her fingers trembling as she took it. "Why are you doing this? We are nothing to you. We are servants." I met her eyes, letting her see the truth in mine. "You are not nothing. You are the mother of a boy who saved my life. That makes you family. And I protect my family, no matter the cost." Micah looked up at me, his small face serious, his eyes filled with something that might have been understanding. "Will you find the bad man?" he asked. "Will you make sure he can't hurt anyone else?" I knelt down, bringing myself to his level. "I will find him, Micah. I will find him, and I will make sure he never hurts anyone ever again. I promise you." He nodded, a solemn acceptance, as if he had known the answer all along, and in that moment, I made a vow. A vow to protect this child and his mother, a vow to find Gideon and destroy him, a vow to build a world where children like Micah could grow up without fear. It was a vow I would keep, no matter the cost. The Adirondack safe house was a fortress disguised as a hunting lodge. I had flown there in the early hours of the morning, my private helicopter cutting through the mist that clung to the mountain peaks like a shroud. The journey had been silent, my thoughts consumed by the weight of what I was doing, the responsibility I was taking on, the promise I had made to a boy who had saved my life, Elena met me on the landing pad, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen too much and survived it all. She wore practical clothes, boots and a heavy jacket, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of a former operative who had spent decades navigating the shadowy corners of the world. "Alessandro," she said, her voice warm but measured. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I agreed, stepping off the helicopter. "I need your help, Elena. I need you to protect someone." She led me into the lodge, a sprawling structure of rough-hewn timber and stone that had been outfitted with every security measure money could buy. Cameras, motion sensors, reinforced doors, a communication system that could reach any corner of the globe. It was a sanctuary, a place where people could disappear from the world and never be found. Helena and Micah were already inside, sitting in the main room by a roaring fire. Helena looked small, fragile, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. Micah, by contrast, seemed almost at ease, his dark eyes taking in the room with the same quiet observation he had displayed in the ballroom. Elena settled into a chair across from them, her gaze moving between mother and son with a professional assessment that I recognized immediately. She was evaluating them, understanding them, learning the contours of their fear and their trust. "Helena," Elena said, her voice gentle, "I know this is overwhelming. I know you're scared. But I need you to understand something. You are safe here. No one will find you. No one will harm you. My only job is to protect you and your son." Helena nodded, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the fire. She had not spoken much since we had arrived, her words buried under the weight of everything that had happened. Micah, however, was more forthcoming. He looked at Elena with the same steady gaze he had given me, his small face serious and composed. "Are you a soldier?" he asked. Elena smiled, a hint of warmth in her usually guarded expression. "I used to be. Now, I'm a guardian. I keep people safe from the bad things in the world." "Like Alessandro?" Micah asked. I felt a lump form in my throat, the unexpected depth of the boy's question hitting me like a physical blow. He was asking if I was one of the bad things, or if I was something else. He was trying to understand the moral landscape of a world that had already shown him its darkest corners. "Alessandro is complicated," Elena said, her eyes meeting mine across the room. "He has done bad things and he has done good things. But he is trying to protect you. That is what matters right now." Micah considered this, his brow furrowed in thought. Then he nodded, a small, decisive gesture that seemed to settle something in his mind. "I think he's a good man," he said. "He has sad eyes. Sad eyes are usually good." The words hit me harder than any bullet ever could. I had spent decades cultivating a reputation of fear, building an empire on the foundation of my ruthlessness. No one had ever called me good. No one had ever looked past the monster to see something worthy of redemption. And yet, a 3-year-old boy had seen through it all. "Micah," I said, my voice rough, "I promise you, I will make this world safe for you. I will find the bad man. I will stop him. And when I do, I will come back for you. I will take you home." He smiled, a bright, unguarded smile that transformed his serious face into something radiant. "I know," he said. "I knew it the first time I saw you. The red lights were angry, but you were calm. You were the calm in the middle of the storm." I turned away, unable to bear the weight of his trust, the purity of his belief in me. I walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered mountains, the dense forests that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Gideon was waiting, plotting, preparing his next move. I would find him. I would destroy him. And then I would return to this place, to this boy, to the promise I had made. "Elena," I said, my back still turned.
"Keep them safe."
"No matter what happens, keep them safe."
"I will," she said.
"You have my word." I turned back to face them, taking in the image of Helena and Micah by the fire, Elena watching over them like a guardian angel. It was a picture of peace, of safety, of everything I had never allowed myself to want. "You should go," Elena said gently. "You have work to do." I nodded, walking toward the door. But before I left, I paused, Looking back at Micah one last time, "I will see you soon," I said. "I promise." He raised his small hand in a wave, his smile unwavering. "Be careful, Alessandro. The red lights are still out there." The words echoed in my mind as I walked back to the helicopter, as I lifted off into the gray morning sky, as I flew back toward the city that held my enemies and my fate. The red lights were still out there. But so was I. And I would not stop until I had extinguished every single one. The hunt for Gideon consumed me. Days blurred into nights, the boundaries between them dissolving in the relentless pursuit of a ghost who had evaded every trap I had set. I worked from the estate, my study transformed into a war room, its walls covered with maps and photographs and the threads of a conspiracy that seemed to stretch into every corner of the city. Antonio had been relentless in his investigation, his network of informants scouring the underworld for any mention of the name Gideon. We had found traces, whispers, fragments of a larger picture that refused to come into focus. A shell company here, a dead drop there, a series of encrypted communications that led to nothing but more questions. But slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a profile that Gideon was not a man who operated in the open. He was a shadow, a presence that could be felt but never seen. His network was vast, spanning multiple cities and multiple organizations, connecting rivals who should have been enemies into a single, coordinated force. He had resources beyond anything I had anticipated, funding that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And he had a personal vendetta against me. That was the piece that finally made sense. The attacks, the orchestration, the careful cultivation of Christopher and Victoria, it was all driven by something deeper than ambition. It was driven by revenge. But revenge for what I had made enemies over the years. More than I could count. I had destroyed families, ended bloodlines, left widows and orphans in my wake. Any one of them could have grown into the monster who called himself Gideon. That I needed to find the source. I needed to understand the wound that had festered into this obsession, the consortium, Antonio said one evening, spreading a series of documents across my desk. "We've traced it back to a single point of origin. A group of families who were united by a common loss. They called themselves the Syndicate of the Forgotten." The name meant nothing to me. "Who are they?" "Families you destroyed, Alessandro. Decades ago, when you were first building your empire. You crushed them, took their territory, left them in ruins. But you didn't kill all of them. Some survived.
Some went underground.
They've been rebuilding ever since, waiting for the right moment to strike." I sat back, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. I remembered those days, the ruthless efficiency with which I had dismantled my rivals. I had been young, hungry, driven by a fury that had consumed everything in its path. I had not spared the families, the children, the innocents caught in the crossfire. But I had not killed them all. And those who had survived had grown into something far more dangerous than their fathers had ever been. "Who leads them?" I asked, my voice flat, emotionless. "Who is Gideon?" Antonio hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty that made my blood run cold. "We don't have a name. But we have a location. There's a gathering tonight, a meeting of the consortium's leadership. It's being held at an old warehouse in the meatpacking district. If Gideon is anywhere, he will be there." I rose from my chair, the weariness of the past weeks falling away, replaced by a cold, focused determination. "We move tonight. I want the building surrounded, every exit covered. I want Gideon alive. The rest of them, do what you will." "Alessandro," Antonio said, his voice cautious. "This is a trap. You know it is. They want you to come. They want you to walk into their hands." "Of course it's a trap," I said, my voice hard. "But it's also the only way I'm going to get close to him. I've been hunting a ghost. Tonight, I make him real." The warehouse was a crumbling relic of an earlier era, its brick facade streaked with grime and neglect. I approached it with a small team of my most trusted men, their weapons concealed beneath their coats, their eyes scanning the darkness for threats. The interior was vast, cavernous, filled with the detritus of forgotten industry. Rusted machinery, broken pallets, the skeletal remains of a failed business. And in the center of it all, a table, surrounded by chairs, occupied by the men and women who had sworn to destroy me. They looked up as I entered, their faces a mix of surprise and satisfaction. They had expected me, of course. They had planned for it. But they had not expected me to come alone. "Welcome, Alessandro," a voice said, echoing from the shadows. "I was beginning to think you would never arrive." I turned toward the sound, my hand resting on the grip of my pistol. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall and lean, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. He walked with the easy grace of a man who had nothing to fear, his steps measured, deliberate. "Gideon," I said, "show yourself." He stepped into the light, and I felt the breath catch in my throat. The face was unfamiliar, but the eyes were a mirror of my own. Cold, calculating, filled with the same ruthless determination that had driven me for decades. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he said, his voice soft, almost sad. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. It's been a long time. I was just a boy when you destroyed my family, but I never forgot. I never forgave." He pulled off the hat, revealing a face that was younger than I had expected, but etched with the same hard lines of a life lived in the shadows. I searched my memory, my mind racing through the faces of the enemies I had made. And then I saw it, the resemblance, the same jawline, the same brow, the ghost of a father I had killed 30 years ago. "Dominic," I whispered. "You're Dominic's son." He smiled, a cold, empty expression that did not reach his eyes. "You remember. My father would be so touched. He died begging for your mercy, you know. He said you were a man of honor, that you would spare his family. He was wrong." I felt the weight of his words, the truth of my own sin pressing down on me. I had killed his father. I had destroyed his family. And I had left him to grow up in the ashes, nursing a hatred that had festered into this elaborate, meticulous plan for revenge. "You have every right to hate me," I said. "But this ends tonight. Your revenge ends tonight." "Does it?" he asked, his smile widening. "You think you can stop me? You think you can undo what you've done? You're too late, Alessandro. The seeds were planted long ago. The harvest is already in motion." He raised his hand, and I heard the click of a detonator. The walls of the warehouse shuddered, and I realized with a sinking certainty that the trap was not for me. It was for him. He had wired the building to explode, intending to take us all with him. "I've already won," he said, his voice triumphant. "When I die, my legacy lives on. The consortium will continue. They will keep fighting. They will never stop." I raised my pistol, aiming it at his chest. "Maybe. But you won't be around to see it." I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the cavernous warehouse, a single sharp crack that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. Dominic's son, the man who had called himself Gideon, staggered backward, his hand flying to his chest where the bullet had found its mark. His face was a mask of shock, the cold arrogance that had defined him replaced by something raw and human. He looked down at the blood seeping through his fingers, then back at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. You actually did it," he said, his voice a broken whisper. "You killed me." I lowered the pistol, my arm steady despite the weight of what I had just done. "You left me no choice. You are going to burn this building to the ground. You are going to kill everyone in it, including yourself. I couldn't let that happen." He laughed, a wet, rattling sound that ended in a cough of blood. "You think this ends with me? You think I'm the only one? There are others, Alessandro. Others who have been waiting for this moment. You killed my father, destroyed my family, and I built an army from the ashes. That army won't just disappear because I'm gone." "I know," I said, stepping closer. "But it will be leaderless. And leaderless armies are easy to dismantle." He collapsed to his knees, his strength failing him, his life bleeding out onto the grimy concrete floor. I watched him die, feeling nothing but a cold, distant satisfaction. The monster who had tried to destroy me was gone. The threat he had represented was neutralized, but the war was not over. I turned away from his body, scanning the room for the rest of the consortium. They were frozen, their faces pale, their hands raised in surrender. They had expected Gideon to deliver a victory, not a death. They had expected to walk out of this warehouse as the architects of a new order. Instead, they were standing in the presence of a man who had just killed their leader in cold blood. "Sal," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Secure them. All of them. I want them in separate holding cells by morning." Sal moved forward, his men fanning out across the warehouse, their weapons trained on the terrified consortium members. There were no protests, no resistance. The fight had gone out of them the moment Gideon had fallen. I walked toward the exit, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. The night air hit me like a physical force, cold and sharp and clean. I breathed it in, letting it wash away the stench of blood and betrayal that clung to my clothes. The hunt was over. Gideon was dead. The consortium was in ruins. The threat that had consumed my life for weeks was finally neutralized, but the cost had been high. I thought of Helena and Micah, hidden in the Adirondack Mountains, waiting for me to fulfill my promise. I thought of Christopher, broken and defeated in the basement of my estate. I thought of Victoria, walking the streets of this city with nothing but the clothes on her back, her empire of lies reduced to ashes. And I thought of myself, standing on the precipice of a future I had never imagined. For years, I had built my empire on fear, on blood, on the destruction of anyone who stood in my way. I had justified it with the cold logic of survival, the belief that the world was a ruthless place and only the ruthless survived. But Micah had shown me something different. He had shown me that there was another way, a path that didn't require the annihilation of everything in my path. That I didn't know if I could walk that path. I didn't know if I had the strength to change.
But I knew that I wanted to try.
The helicopter ride to the Adirondacks was silent, my thoughts consumed by the weight of everything that had happened. I landed at the lodge as the sun was rising, the first rays of light painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Elena met me on the landing pad, her face unreadable. It's done, I said. "Gideon is dead. The consortium is finished. It's over." She nodded, a small, satisfied gesture. "I'll let them know. They've been asking about you." I walked into the lodge, the warmth of the fire washing over me. Helena was sitting in the main room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the flames. She looked up as I entered, and I saw the fear in her gaze transform into something else. Relief, perhaps. Or hope. "Alessandro," she said, rising to her feet. "You're back. You're safe." "I'm back," I said, my voice rough with exhaustion. "And I'm safe. It's over, Helena. The threat is gone. You and Micah can come home." She smiled, a hesitant, trembling smile that broke my heart. "We're home, Alessandro. This is our home now. The estate, the city, it was never really my home. This is where I want to raise my son. This is where I want to build a new life." I looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing the strength beneath the fear, the resilience beneath the exhaustion. She was a survivor just like me, and she had found a place where she could finally be at peace. "Then I'll make sure you have everything you need," I said. "This lodge, the land, the resources to build whatever kind of life you want. You and Micah will never want for anything." She reached out, her hand touching my arm, a gesture of gratitude and connection. "Thank you, Alessandro, for everything, for protecting us, for keeping your promise." I looked toward the bedroom door, where I could see Micah sleeping peacefully in the soft glow of the morning light. He had saved my life. He had shown me the red lights in the walls. And he had shown me a different way to live. "Micah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's the one who saved me. He's the reason we're all here. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure he never has to be afraid again." Helena smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "He knows. He told me you would come back. He said you were a man of your word. And he was right." I looked out the window, at the mountains and the forests and the endless sky. The world was vast and dangerous, full of shadows and threats and red lights waiting in the walls. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face it. I had found something worth fighting for, and I would never let it go. The mountains held a silence that the city could never replicate. I stood on the porch of the lodge, watching the sun climb over the peaks, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. The air was cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and earth and something unnameable that felt like peace. It had been 3 months since the night I had killed Gideon, 3 months since I had dismantled the consortium and scattered its remnants to the winds. The city was quiet now, my enemies either dead or cowed, my empire secured through a combination of fear and the grudging respect I had earned by surviving the impossible. But I had not returned to the city. Not in any permanent sense. The estate still stood, its walls still guarded, its business still conducted through the network of trusted lieutenants I had cultivated over the decades. Antonio managed the day-to-day operations, his silver hair now streaked with more white, his voice as steady and reliable as ever. I trusted him with my life, and more importantly, I trusted him with my legacy. My life had changed. I had changed. And the change had begun with a boy who had seen red lights in the walls. Micah came running out of the lodge, his small feet pounding against the wooden deck, his laughter echoing across the valley. He was wearing a thick coat and boots that were too big for him, his dark hair sticking up in wild tufts that defied every attempt at control. Helena followed at a more measured pace, her face soft with the contentment of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. "Alessandro," Micah shouted, skidding to a stop in front of me. "Are you coming?" Elena said we could go to the lake today. She said there are fish. Big ones. I smiled, reaching down to ruffle his hair. Big fish? That sounds dangerous. Are you sure you're ready for that? He nodded vigorously, his eyes bright with excitement. I'm ready. I'm not scared of anything. You taught me that. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had taught him that in a way. I had taught him that fear was a choice, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. He had taught me something too. He had taught me that the world was not just a battlefield, that there were moments of joy and peace and simple happiness that were worth fighting for. Helena reached us, her hand brushing my arm in a gesture of casual intimacy that had become second nature. She was no longer the terrified maid who had cowered in the corner of my study. She was a partner. A friend, a woman who had seen me at my worst and chosen to stay. "The lake," she said, her voice warm. "Elena has packed a picnic. She said we can stay as long as we like." I looked at them, at the two people who had become the center of my world. Helena, with her quiet strength and her unwavering faith in me. Micah, with his strange gift and his unshakable belief that I was a good man. And for the first time in my life, I believed it too. "Then let's go," I said, taking Micah's hand in mine. "Let's go find those big fish." We walked down the path toward the lake, the three of us, a family forged in the crucible of betrayal and redemption. The world was still dangerous, still full of shadows and enemies and red lights waiting in the walls, but I had found something I had lost long ago. I had found hope. I had found purpose. I had found a reason to believe that the future could be brighter than the past. And I would spend the rest of my life protecting that future, with every breath in my body, with every beat of my heart. The red lights were gone. The darkness had receded. And in its place, there was light.